Both teams entered the third game of the season having given up just one touchdown in 2 games. But the game opened on an ominous note as the stout Hiram defense tackled Harold Stanley in the end zone for the first safety that Windham High School had ever given up. Then talented Keaton Clark passed the end Stan Fields for 1 touchdown, ran in a lateral himself for another touchdown, and Harry Hurd added yet another. Windham's only score came on a triple lateral to Con Thrasher in the last 2 minutes of the game, enabling the Bombers to avoid a shutout. And so it was over. The longest winning streak in Ohio high school 6-man history, 21 games over 3 years, had been snapped by a team that would lose to Ashtabula Edgewood 46-12 the following week in a non-conference game. The Clyde game, which Everwine had scheduled with such high hopes, was anticlimactic. The Bombers traveled to Sandusky County the next Saturday and fought hard against a team that was to go undefeated that year, but lost 18-16. A final game crushing of Manaway Village, 50-0, did nothing to remove the bitter taste of a season gone wrong. And to add insult to injury, the league championship game, Hiram versus Charlestown, was scheduled for Windham's own field. Hiram would win that game 28-26 in a game that had one of the most bizarre endings in the history of sports. Charlestown's drop kicker prepared to boot the extra points that would tie the game and misjudged his leg swing, hitting the ground behind the ball and breaking his foot. And so the 1941 season ended, the final appearance on a field for the greatest collection of gridiron athletes that Windham had ever seen. They'd played together for 4 years and had lost only 2 games in the Portage County Conference. That same group of boys made the transition to the basketball team of Coach Dave Thomas and proceeded to claim Windham's first ever Portage County basketball championship with a 17-2 record, the beginning of a tradition that continues 70 years later. But even as Windham celebrated its basketball victory over Streetsboro on December 6, 1941, Japanese warplanes over Pearl Harbor were prepared to change the lives of every single American. And a 2-day wage strike against the Atlas Powder Company, under government contract to run the arsenal, became a very quick thing of the past. Food rationing was the first indication that things were going to be different. Housewives had to sign up for sugar distribution, and meat was to follow shortly. There were no bicycles under Christmas trees that year, because every single bicycle manufactured in the United States was appropriated for civil defense volunteers in each village in the country. On August 15, 1942, the Ohio High School Athletic Association met to decide whether to eliminate high school sports for the duration of the war. The reasons were myriad. There was a shortage of coaches, as many had enlisted in the armed forces. Proposed blackout rules would have turned out the lights at night football games. The Department of War had ordered all buses to be ready at any time for emergency evacuation. And gasoline was now severely rationed. But 6-man football survived by the nature of its small teams. Athletic boosters donated their gas rations, and a whole team could fit in 2 or 3 automobiles. And 6-man games were played immediately after school. The blackout rules did not affect them. But even more than the hardships that the war occasioned, Windham was to undergo a transformation unlike that of any town in the United States. Because in the summer of 1942, the United States government bought up every square inch of available land in the village. It then contracted with the Hunkin Conley Company a concern that came to prominence rebuilding San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake, and which in 1931 had built Municipal Stadium in Cleveland. They were to build 2,000 housing units in the middle of Windham. Almost immediately, they fell behind due to material shortages. But the first workers of the Atlas Powder Company began to move into the new Maple Grove housing project that fall. The USO, that home away from home for soldiers and war personnel, began meeting in the Brick Chapel every Wednesday for the arsenal and construction workers. And new faces began to show up in the Windham schools. New faces in such numbers that Superintendent Dean Everwan was overwhelmed with his responsibilities. And what he had to do was give up coaching. The Portage County Board of Education, which then did all the hiring for the county schools, assigned a young man not much out of college, former Kent State Golden Flash Kenneth Folger, to become the shop teacher at Windham High School. And Folger took over the reins of the most honored six-man football team in Ohio history, although he had never seen a six-man football game in his life. Although the 1942 season started out later than ever, Folger had little time to get acquainted with his team. The Bombers were lucky to even have a coach. The Edinburgh Scots, Charlestown Rams, and the Manaway Township team, which didn't even have a nickname, had no coach, and they had to cancel their season, leaving only 5 teams in the Portage County Conference. And Dean Everwine, ex-coach and current superintendent, volunteered to referee games, since there was a notable shortage of those officials because of the war, too. Paul Turner, Art Joy, and Frank Janicek were the only returning Bombers with any substantial playing experience. And Folger told the newspaper reporters that he expected what he called a redevelopment year. In other words, he didn't expect to win many games. An opening game loss for the Manaway Village Hilltoppers, 12-7, didn't look too bad. But then in the second game, against a Shalersville team organized only the week before, and which was destined to fold before the season ended, the Bombers fell 10-6. And Folger's words appeared to be prophetic. He shuffled his lineup from week to week, choosing from a cast of players including Harold Williams, Glenn Ball, Harold Rising, Harvey Warren, Richard Warren, Henry Dilley, Wyatt Carmen, Dick Haney, Tom Webb, Claude McManus, Ray Phillips, and Bob Horner. Settling on a lineup of Rising and Janicek at end, Wedding at center, Ray Phillips at fullback, Joy at quarterback, and Paul Turner at halfback, Folger, so well grounded in 11-man football, finally began to grasp the fundamentals of 6-man football, and slowly but surely Windham began to regain its old gridiron flair. Hiram came to town, and the Bombers avenged the stinging defeat of the previous year with a 26-7 pasting. The Deerfield Bisons fell in a 7-6 nail-biter. So the final league game of the season against Garrettsville would be for second place in the league. This was the first time that Windham had ever faced the G-men on a football field. So the bitterest rivalry in all of Portage County began with a 19-0 shutout by the maturing Bombers. Although all through the spring and summer of 1943, the deprivations of a wartime society became a fact of life. As fall approached, patriotic Americans harvested victory gardens. Tool sheds were scavenged for scrap metal drives. And since 18-year-olds were now liable for the draft, many of Portage County's young men were in a military uniform instead of donning shoulder pads and leather helmets. In Windham, a strange dichotomy had developed. The Ravenna newspaper always carefully separated references to Windham Village and the Maple Grove housing project. as if they were inhabited by two different species.